Hey, how's it going? Wanted to do a short overview of one of the first topics in networking, particularly in Java, and that's the subject of sockets. And if you understand to some degree what sockets are, you've got a good start on being able to figure out networking. In Java, there's actually a class called socket, and there's another class called server socket. And once we know how to work with those two classes, we can set up networked communication with other machines. Um, but the idea of what is a socket can be kind of confusing. When I first came into this, it was well documented but hard to understand. So let me back up and give you a real world situation. So in the 70s, I was working on a computer in high school, and this computer was shared by 14 or 15 different schools around New York State. And so we had one computer. It was a PDP-11. I think it was 1170. And we had all these different keyboards that people were using. And so in our school, there were two of these keyboards, and these were big mechanical things. They were called deck writers. And picture a mechanical version of putty. So something with a keyboard and a printer that would show you output. And it was really just, a mechanical putty. And it was connected to a phone line, and through the phone network, it would connect to this one machine. And somebody at a different school had a few terminals in their facility that would connect to this same machine. So at any time, there might be several people connected to this machine, even though we might be, 50, 60 miles apart in different areas of New York State. And so one thing that, came to mind as we were messing around with this as high school kids was, it would be cool to be able to talk to people from other schools. And so a popular experiment was to try to create a chat program so that I could sit over here and type messages, and somebody over here could read those messages and then type and send them back to me. Now, this is all a single machine, single CPU, single hard drive, right? There's no networking involved here. We were all connecting to this one machine through different terminals. But we figured out, that we could convey information through files. So there was a file system on the hard drive, and we could create files and put information into there. And so imagine a simple chat program where we have user one. So maybe this is a user in Corning, New York, and we have user two, and maybe this is a user in Vestal, New York. And there's a file sitting over here. We'll call it file F1. And there's a file sitting over here, and we'll call it file F2. So when user 1 wants to send a message to user 2, what do? They open up this file, and they put a message in. And if they want to send a second message, maybe they open this up and they put another message in, so they append to the bottom of the file. And then, this user goes off to class or something, and sometime later in the day, user 2 comes up on their machine. Now, these are, physically separated different parts of the state, but on the same machine. So this user can open this file and see, hey, there's a couple of messages in there. So it opens up the file, reads each message, prints it out, and then removes them. And now if this user wants to send a message back, they can open up file 1, put a message in there. And now the next day, user 1 comes back and they run their program, and all their program does is open this file and see if there's anything inside. Hey, here's a message from user 2. So it prints out that message, removes it from the file. So you could communicate in this way. You could send messages back and forth, and really all you were doing was depositing information into a shared file. But if you added additional information around this, like who this message was coming from and who it was going to, then the program that a user might run to interact with that file could do things like, look for a message directed to, whoever's running the program, and ignore messages that were directed to somebody else. So now we could have multiple people over here and over here sharing messages back and forth through these files. All right, this is really all that sockets do, except instead of using files on the hard drive, they use memory inside the machine. And instead of requiring that all the users be on the same physical CPU, there's a mechanism where information can be sent from one machine to another, and code on the back end will basically, do the same effect of this. Now, your information is not stored in files, right? It's stored in memory. But the way we can think of this is very similar functionally. So a socket is basically a thing that a user can write into and somebody else can read from. So instead of opening a file, so here's user 1, here's user 2. Instead of opening a file, I open what's called a socket, and I can send information into that socket. And user 2 can read information from that socket. And also know, if there's nothing in there to read, and so on. And then user 1 can have their socket, and user 2 can write into that, and user 1 can read it. So as we start going through the socket class and the server socket class, if you're not sure what a socket is, just think of it as, a repository into which information can be sent. And when I say message, it could be, any kind of data. Very often it's binary information, but it's some sort of information being sent into this socket, and it will basically sit there until somebody on the other side of the connection reads from that socket. So it's like a pipeline, basically. All right, so next video, let's start looking at the socket class and the server socket class in Java.